welcome one of our favorite guests ever nail the market action in 2020 here. That, of course, would be Fundstrat Global Advisors Managing Partner and Head of Research, Tom Lee. And Tom, as I said, I mean, you nailed everything in 2020, and you're out with a new note here to look ahead to 2021, which is very interesting. And I just kind of want to break it down because you focus in on the VIX. And you've told us to watch that before as kind of being one of the key indicators in terms of where the market is headed from here. And it sounds like you're breaking down kind of where the volatility expectations are here in 2021, with investors showing that they're expecting similar levels of volatility to what we saw play out last year. So what does that mean for the markets when you look at the data?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. The VIX, which is a measure of expected volatility, I think has always provided a lot of good signal for people. And high levels of spot VIX obviously mean people are scared. But what we wrote about was that when you look at the futures market for VIX, because that's really where more activity is, VIX is expected to be high all the way through September. And if you think about it, that's a pretty insane level of fear that people are scared for the next 9 months. But what's interesting is that this level of fear is exactly almost the same level it was throughout all of 2020. So people don't think anything's getting better. And that's how the market is perceiving equities today and the economy. And if you believe things are indeed improving, then you should be buying stocks because the VIX is destined to fall in the next 9 months. But another thing that we pointed out was...
I was just going to get to it, that second point.
Yeah, the second point is if you look at the fact that people think current volatility was higher than future, that's how 2020 averaged. And people just thought there was always going to be a near-term volatility event. In the 12 months after averaging a level like that, stocks do incredibly well. In fact, they've never had a down year. So 2021 is a year where the VIX is unwinding that fear. And historically, the average gain is 23%. So I think stocks have an underlying positive risk reward. And I think that's how you should approach it. But again, future's uncertain, COVID's uncertain. So, just keep that in mind. But again, history says this should be a great year for stocks.
Tom, in addition to the equity markets, we always like to come to you to talk about Bitcoin. Certainly significant gains that we've seen trading right now well above 41,000. You saw that note out from JPM earlier this week talking about Bitcoin hitting 146,000. Has your thesis changed at all given the significant surge that we have seen over the last several weeks?
I think that the price move in Bitcoin actually is pretty textbook. Because it's behaving the way crypto and Bitcoin has acted after previous halvenings, when the block reward's cut in half. And 2017 was a year when Bitcoin last went parabolic. That's one full year after the halvening. 2021 would pattern itself after that. So if the fact that Bitcoin's doubled almost in 10 days, and I think the JP Morgan numbers are not that far off. I mean, I'm not sure I'd be that precise with 146,000. But I think Bitcoin, if it looks like 2017, will be up at least 300% this year.
It does seem like an oddly precise price target there too, huh? I mean, you guys had 40,000. We're already above that now. You said that it could quadruple. That would put it above 100,000 here at some point in 2021. So I mean, continue that trend. We've talked about volatility in Bitcoin and how quickly it can move south here. So I mean, obviously, it's not expected to be a straight up and to the right chart, or is it? Maybe how should investors be looking at it?
Yeah, it's a hyper volatile asset. Again, I just would point out the future's uncertain, but our roadmap for risk assets this year is that stocks would be pretty explosive out of the gate and peak in sometime either in late January, but as late as April around S&P 4,000 before a big drawdown happens. I think Bitcoin is going to, if the S&P falls 10%, Bitcoin is going to have a huge drawdown. It could be down 40, 50%. So I don't think it's straight up with a ruler. It's going to be pretty jagged, but I think at the end of the year, Bitcoin is much higher.
Did you say it could be down as much as 40%?
Yes, but that's a pretty typical correction for crypto. In fact, I think last year it had a couple of drawdowns nearly that size. So that's what you get with a permissionless blockchain and experiencing hyper growth and adoption.
I mean, you talk about kind of this risk, the trigger that we're expected to see in the first half of 2021 that could spark this correction. A lot of people were wondering if that was going to be, the outcome of the Democratic wins in Georgia. It doesn't seem to be, based on the market reaction we're seeing play out now. So when you look ahead, I guess our attention turns back to kind of the vaccine rollout. You have your eyes on Israel to see how things are going over there. But what's kind of your next judgment of what could trigger maybe that correction you see on the horizon, and what investors should be watching now?
Yeah, I mean, well, foremost, it was never our view that the Senate race would have any impact on markets. I think it's that's someone's, imaginary shouting at the market to do something. So I think that if there's something that's going to scare markets, it's kind of what you said. It would be the risk that the pandemic looks like we're losing ground. I mean, right now there's millions of people getting vaccinated, and hopefully that leads to a slowdown in infections. That's why we're watching Israel closely, because Israel is the furthest along with percentage of the population. And, so presumably if cases start to slow, that's good. But if they don't, I don't know. I think that would be very worrisome. The other thing is, the yield curve, which has really great predictive power on what the PMIs will do. The yield curve is saying that PMIs are potentially going to be peaking this month in January and then fall through May. And I think that move towards 50 on the ISMs could make people think we're heading towards a recession. And that could be a reason for stocks to sell off. But, the market's unpredictable. But again, I just want to be clear. Nobody at Fundstrat thought the Senate race would have any bearing on markets, even if people were sitting on cash. In fact, I would counter trade that and say that's one reason we thought that markets would be explosive out of the gates.
Tom, I want to follow up on that point you just made about the virus itself and the spread, that if in fact it felt like we're sort of losing control. I mean, you could argue, if we're following sort of what the health community is saying, this is about the worst that we're seeing in terms of the surge, things likely to get worse at a time when there are some signs that the vaccine rollout may not happen as rapidly as we initially thought. How are you following the numbers here in the U.S. and how's the outlook on that front changed for you at all when you look at how slow the inoculations have actually gone in the first month of this vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, CDC is releasing the data daily, and our data science team is pulling that data. And so we have a good real-time snapshot. It comes out at 9 a.m. every day. I actually think the vaccinations are ramping up pretty dramatically. I mean, yesterday they were 30% above the day before, and the pace is around 500,000 now. It's probably going to hit 1 million next week. And that would get to roughly 30% of Americans being vaccinated by April. And that's also when the winter kind of ends and COVID hopefully is retreating. So I think, it's a mistake to think that out of the gates, if the vaccines are choppy now, and that's a lot of it's state implementation. It's going to look like that in April. I'm sure it's going to ramp up. Look what happened with testing in the US. I mean, now the US has carpet bombed with testing, and in the beginning it was slow. So I'm not that worried about it. But yeah, if COVID mutates or if the vaccine doesn't work, that would be very worrisome.
Tom Lee, always good to get your perspective here on the show. Fundstrat Global Advisors, Managing Partner and Head of Research.